Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. The organ never stopped playing. The sound came from somewhere behind the altar, low, rumbling organ notes, echoing in the empty stone church like a heartbeat too deep to be human. Father Elias froze mid-step. It was 3:17. M. The church had been locked hours ago. The electricity had been cut for repairs. No one was supposed to be here, least of all the organ. Yet there it was, playing. Slow, deliberate, like fingers dragging themselves across ivory keys. He turned to the altar and called out, "Who's there?" No answer, just a single drawn-out note, now, humming so low it made the air in his lungs vibrate. Elias gripped the crucifix around his neck tighter. His knuckles whitened. He had served this church for 29 years. Baptisms, confessions, funerals. He had seen it all. But this was different. He moved forward, past the altar, into the shadows beyond the pulpit. The church was ancient, built in 1834, and its back rooms held generations of forgotten relics, statues too damaged to display, portraits with the eyes scratched out, books written in Latin by trembling hands. And now, that music. It stopped, just like that silence, but the silence wasn't empty. It felt watched. Elias reached the small stairwell, leading to the organ balcony above. He slowly began to climb. His breath caught halfway up. There, resting on the bottom stair, was a single black feather, large, glossy, still warm to the touch. He stared at it. There were no birds in the church, and then came a whisper, not from the organ loft above, but from the confessional booths below. "Forgive me, Father, for I have returned." He spun around. The sound hadn't echoed. It had slithered straight into his ear like breath from behind. But no one was there. He turned back toward the stairs. There was now more than one black feather. They were multiplying, growing into a soft trail leading upward. He gritted his teeth, reached the top, and stepped into the loft. The organ sat still, covered in dust. But in front of it was a child, no older than 10, pale hair, wet, wearing a tattered white choir robe, her back to him. She was trembling. Elias blinked. "Who are you?" The child didn't respond. He moved closer. "Sweetheart, are you lost?" Still nothing. But then she began to hum, a soft melody. It wasn't a hymn, it was something else. Low, dark, almost like a funeral dirge. He reached out to gently touch her shoulder. She turned. Her eyes had no pupils. Her lips had no mouth. And yet, the humming grew louder, as if coming from inside his own head. Elias stumbled back, struck the wall, and dropped to his knees. The humming kept rising until it became a scream, not from her mouthless face, but from the pipes of the organ themselves. They breathed. He could feel it now. The organ wasn't being played. It was alive. The keys moved on their own, smashing down in chaos. A dozen black feathers blew out from its pipes and sliced the air like blades. Elias crawled for the stairs, but the child moved without walking, sliding forward in broken, jerky motions like a puppet on strings. "It's still inside me," she whispered from nowhere, no mouth to speak, but words still spoken. "He said it would stop, once I confessed." Elias reached the bottom stair, but the sound shifted now behind him. The girl was at the base of the organ again, hands bleeding as she pressed invisible keys. He turned back one last time, but now the girl was gone. In her place was a crumpled photograph. Old Yellowed. He picked it up with shaking fingers. It showed a choir group from decades ago. At the center was that same little girl. Above her name, Eliza Margaret Black, was a date. She died in 1961. But the back of the photo had a short message scrawled in red ink. "You let it happen, and now you'll never leave." The organ began to play again. Only this time, Elias wasn't hearing it with his ears. It was coming from inside his chest. He stumbled through the nave, pushing the heavy church doors open. They didn't budge. He ran to the side entrance, locked. The confessional door creaked open behind him. Elias turned slowly. Inside, sitting in the darkened booth, was another priest, eyes closed, head bowed, but his throat was torn open. Blood had dried into the pages of a prayer book in his lap. Elias backed away, heart pounding. That priest had died 3 years ago. He had presided over the funeral. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. And then the whisper returned, that same sickening hiss curling around his ears. She begged for help, Elias. You told her God would forgive, but you never stopped him. Tears welled in his eyes. He collapsed to the floor. Who did I let hurt her? The shadows answered. Figure stepped from behind the confessional, dressed in an old priest's robe, face obscured by a black veil, hands blistered from candle burns. You did. The lights in the church flickered on for the first time in hours, and the walls were covered in children's names, carved, dozens of them, some carved with fingernails, some in blood. Elias screamed. He wasn't alone. He never had been. And this place, this church, it wasn't just haunted, it was hungry, as he crawled backward. The organ music swelled once more, louder, faster, more deranged. His ears began to bleed. The crucifix around his neck burned hot and split open, the silver melting across his chest like acid. Then, all at once, silence. Total, perfect silence. He looked up. The church was empty again. Dust hung in the air, like fog. The photo, gone. The feathers, gone. The dead priest, gone. The confessional door stood closed, as if untouched. Elias sat trembling, burned, crying, clutching the melted crucifix against his chest. But on the altar behind him, fresh, candlelight flickered. And in the wax was the shape of a small handprint, still warm, still wet with blood. Whispers in the walls. The church sat silent under the choking weight of dawn. Elias hadn't moved from the stone floor. The candle wax handprint still pulsed faint heat behind him. The crucifix that once hung around his neck now lay in his lap, twisted, scorched, no longer a symbol of protection but a curse carved into silver. He hadn't slept, he hadn't prayed, because deep down he knew no one was listening anymore. 6 hours earlier, Joanna Reyes pulled up to St. Bastian's in her rental car, the tires crunching gravel beneath her. She hadn't been here in 22 years, not since her brother's funeral, but something had been calling her back. At first, it was nightmares. Then the letters. Handwritten, no stamp, no return address. Each note simply read, "You forgot him. He didn't die. He's still waiting." She'd thrown the first few away. Then, the last one came, soaked in what looked like dried blood. She couldn't ignore that. So here she was, grown woman, mental health counselor, 2 kids of her own, trembling like a teenager in front of a boarded-up chapel that hadn't been used for regular service in over a decade. She pushed the heavy wooden doors open. Darkness welcomed her. No lights, no power, just the musty scent of forgotten incense and wet stone. Joanna stepped inside, her boots echoing softly across the warped wooden floor. The air felt thick, like it hadn't moved in years. She took out her flashlight and swept it across the nave. Pews stood broken, some with deep claw marks along the edges. The altar was cracked down the middle. But what made her stomach knot, what nearly made her run, were the faces carved into the stone walls. Childlike, hollow-eyed, smiling. Someone had taken the time to etch laughter into agony. And, above the altar, in blackened ash, "Faith couldn't save us." She turned to leave, instinct screaming. That's when she heard it. The voice, high, whispering, "Childish Joe, is that you?" She froze. Her heart hit her ribs like a drumbeat. That voice, "Danny," she whispered back, throat dry. Down. Here it came from the floorboards beneath her, the crawl space. She remembered it. As a child, Danny used to sneak down there. It led beneath the sanctuary, a maze of old foundation stones, prayer tunnels, and buried church records. He was the only one brave enough to go in, until the day he disappeared. They found his shoes in front of the altar. No body. Just blood, and a single black feather. Joanna knelt near the pulpit and pried up the warped floorboard with her flashlight handle. Dust spiraled into the air. The entrance was still there, dark, narrow, impossible to breathe in. But the voice came again. "Don't leave me, Joe, please." She climbed in. The crawl space walls brushed her shoulders, forcing her to drag herself on her elbows. Dirt filled her nose. Her flashlight flickered. There were markings carved into the wooden beams, dozens of them, numbers. She ran, her fingers along them. 22, 19, 11, 8. A sequence. Over and over. They weren't random. They were ages. Her flashlight caught a crude drawing scratched into the wall, a stick figure with crosses for eyes and a noose above its head. Then, the whisper again. "Close. You're so close." She crawled faster. The tunnel opened into a hollowed space beneath the sanctuary, just big enough to kneel in. And there, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, was a boy. No older than 10, same messy brown hair, same crooked ears, same gap-toothed smile. Joanna's breath left her in a sob. Danny. He looked up, but his eyes, they weren't his eyes. They were completely black, like ink poured into sockets. I waited, he said, smiling wider. I knew you'd come back. Joanna crawled to him, shaking. How are you alive? He tilted his head. I'm not. Before she could scream, something yanked her backward, not with hands, with force. A vacuum of cold wind pulled at her limbs, dragging her back through the tunnel. She screamed, flailing, scraping her skin against the beams as she was pulled toward the exit. She spilled out onto the sanctuary floor, coughing, bleeding from her elbows. The floorboard slammed shut behind her. Silence again, except for one thing. A whisper from the walls. Bring him back. Finish what you left undone. She crawled to her feet. The church groaned around her, like it was breathing. She tried to leave, but the front doors were shut tight, nailed from the outside. She ran to the sacristy. The back hallway lights flickered dimly. One bulb buzzed above an old display case filled with relics. Behind the glass, crucifixes, old incense sticks, broken rosaries, and a black and white photo. A children's choir, all smiling, except one. Joanna felt her stomach twist. There, in the back row, was Danny. The photo was dated 1998, but her brother had disappeared in 1996. She looked closer. The image was old, but his face had been scratched over, eyes blacked out, and a red mark drawn over his mouth. The plaque beneath the photo read, "They were promised forgiveness." Suddenly, the light shattered above her. She screamed, shielding her face. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Heavy, limping. A man's voice, who let her in. Joanna ducked into a storage closet, heart hammering. Through the crack in the door, she saw a figure moving down the hallway, wearing a priest's robe, dragging something behind him. A bag, wet, dripping. The man paused outside her hiding place. "No, you're here," he said gently. His voice was wrong, too smooth, like someone pretending to be kind. "I only wanted them to listen," he whispered, "but they made me a monster." The bag he was dragging twitched. Joanna bit her lip to keep from sobbing. "I only punished the guilty," he murmured. He passed. Joanna waited until the footsteps faded. She crept out of the closet, turned the other way down the hall, and there, slumped in a chair by the back exit, was Father Elias. Eyes wide, skin ash gray. His lips moved, but no sound came. She ran to him. "Father, are you okay?" He blinked slowly. His fingers trembled. Then, with all the strength he could muster, he grabbed her wrist and whispered, "Don't believe the children what they lie. They'll make you see what you love, but it's not them. It's never been them." Suddenly, a voice rang out behind her. "Joanna." She turned. Danny stood at the end of the hall. Smiling. With his shadow. Didn't match his shape. It had horns. She turned back to Elias, but he had slumped forward, dead, blood leaking from his ears. The organ began to play again, far away, but she could hear it like it was inside her skull. She backed away, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Danny, please," she whispered. He smiled wider. "I'm not Danny," and his voice layered one over another, until it became many voices speaking in unison. "You left us. Now we're all you have." The baptism room organ music roared in her ears, like 1,000 drowning voices. Joanna stumbled backward down the hallway. The black-eyed boy, the thing wearing her brother's face, grinning at her from the far end. With each step he took, the walls seemed to darken, the air grew colder, and the old church groaned like it was alive and starving. She turned and ran, not knowing where she was going, only knowing she had to get away. Her boots thudded against the cracked tile as she burst through a set of rotting double doors and into a vast round chamber she hadn't seen before. The baptism room. She remembered it now, once filled with soft sunlight, tall windows, and white doves painted on the ceiling. A sacred place. Now, it was wrong, very wrong. Water covered the floor, shallow, but still enough to splash as she stepped in. It was ice cold, murky, dark. In the center of the room stood the old baptismal font, once white marble, now blackened with mold, and something far worse. Red handprints stained its rim. The water inside churned. Despite no wind or movement, the painted doves on the ceiling had peeled away, replaced by eyes, scratched into the plaster. Hundreds of them, watching her, judging her. whispers curled around the room. Drown her like they drowned us. Clean her. Make her worthy. Joanna backed toward the door. It was gone. Only stone behind her now. What is this? She gasped. Why are you doing this? Her voice echoed from behind the font. You were baptized here, remember? She turned and saw herself, a girl of 7, barefoot and smiling, in a white gown. Water dripping from her eyes like tears. You don't remember what you promised, the child Joanna said. I didn't, Joanna started, but the little girl stepped aside, revealing another child behind her, small, soaking wet, lips blue, skin pale, his face bloated. Danny, the real one. His eyes weren't black, just dead, glazed over with cloudy water. He stared at her with accusation, not recognition. Why didn't you pull me out? He asked. Joanna collapsed to her knees, the water soaking her jeans. You were gone. You, they said, you drowned. They said you ran away, and no, Danny said flatly. You held me down. Her mouth fell open. No, I would never. But the memory came flooding back. 1996, summer afternoon, empty church. There, parents fighting again. Danny begging to play baptism. She laughing, holding him under, just for a few seconds, just for fun. Until he stopped struggling, until he went limp, until she screamed, until the priest found her crying, saying he fell, that he slipped. They believed her, a tragedy. An accident. But she remembered now. Her hands had held him down. I didn't mean to, she whispered. Danny stepped toward her, water sloshing around his ankles. The font bubbled behind him, turning red. I died, he said, and you left me here. Suddenly, dozens of children appeared in the room, all soaking wet, all whispering, me too. She let me drown. She watched. They closed in around her. Joanna tried to back away, but the walls were gone, replaced by an endless stretch of dark water. No, she said. You're not real. This isn't real. But the water rose higher, now up to her chest. The children began to chant, clean her, clean her, clean her. The font overflowed. Water spilled across the room, crashing over her like a wave. She was under. Sinking. Hands pulling her down. Tiny fingers clutching her limbs, her hair, her throat. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't scream. Suddenly, a bright light flashed beneath her. Gold, blinding, sacred. The water trembled. The children hissed. Something holy stirred below, and then a hand reached up through the depths and grabbed her wrist. A man's hand, strong, scarred. It yanked her upward through the water until she broke the surface. Gasping, coughing, choking, she was back in the baptism room. Only this time, it was empty. Dry. The font was whole again. White marble, clean water. And in front of her stood a man in tattered priest robes, eyes sunken, face gaunt, skin blistered like he'd walked through fire. Father Matthias, the priest who vanished 10 years ago, declared dead after he disappeared the night Danny died. You're not supposed to be here, he said softly. She crawled back, trembling. You're supposed to be dead. I am. He reached into his sleeve and pulled out a small rosary, scorched and bent. The children aren't angry at you, he said. They're angry at me. Why? Because I didn't protect them. I let this place become a prison. I let him. In Joanna's breath caught. Who? Father Matthias didn't answer. He pointed to the rosary. This will keep him at bay. For now. She took it. It burned in her palm. He knelt beside her. You're not here by accident. You were brought. You're the only one who remembers. Remembers what? He looked up at the ceiling at the eyes and whispered. The ritual. The drowned choir. The pact. Joanna stood slowly. What pact? Father Matthias nodded toward the old stone steps behind the font. Go down. To the crypt. The truth's waiting there. What about you? I stay, he said. I made my bed in this church. Now I sleep in it. She hesitated, then turned and walked to the stairs. As she descended, the air grew colder, the stones slick, the walls tighter. Until she entered a long corridor lit by candles that hadn't been lit in decades. At the end of the hall, a vaulted door. On it, words scratched in Latin. In aqua, in sanguine renascima. In water we died, in blood we are reborn. She pushed the door open and screamed. Inside were dozens of coffins, tiny, child-sized, stacked along. The walls like books, each one marked with a name, each one sealed. All but one. At the center of the room stood a black coffin. Open. Inside, an empty space, and carved into the lid, her name. Joanna Reyes. Behind her, the door slammed shut, and in the darkness a voice whispered, "Now it's your turn." The choir pit. The coffin was empty. Joanna stood over it, breath held, stomach churning. Her name was carved into the lid, not just scratched but etched, as though the wood had burned it into itself. No one could have faked this. No one could have known. She wasn't even born when these coffins were sealed, and yet, somehow, this place had been waiting for her. The door behind her was gone now. No handle, no seam, just stone. Just stone. She was sealed inside the crypt, alone, no sound, no breath of air, just a humming, faint and low. It vibrated through her bones, coming from beneath. Joanna stepped away from the coffin, heart pounding. She had to get out. She had to find answers, and the only way left was down at the far end of the crypt, behind a crumbling statue of the Virgin Mary, her eyes gouged out. Joanna found a narrow spiral staircase descending even deeper. It looked ancient, carved into the earth itself. She took the first step, the rosary from Father Matthias clenched in her fist. It was still warm, still glowing faintly. Each step downward made the air thicker, almost like breathing through wet cloth. The humming grew louder. Voices joined it, singing, children, single quotes as voices are choir. But there was no joy in it, no warmth, just sorrow and rage. At the bottom, she found herself in a massive underground chamber. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, dripping with mildew. Stone pews were lined in neat rows, all facing an altar carved from human bone. And behind the altar was a pit, wide, circular, bottomless. The choir pit, and seated all around its edge were children, some skeletal, some pale and bloated, some frozen mid-scream, but all humming. All singing in whispers. All dead. Joanna felt her knees give. These weren't just ghosts. These were sacrifices, a ritual, a pact. She remembered Father Matthias's words, "In water we died, in blood we are reborn." Something moved in the pit. She stepped forward. One of the children, a little girl in a 1920s school uniform, face cracked like porcelain, turned her head. "Joanna Reyes," she whispered. Joanna flinched. "How do you know my name?" "You were promised to him." The girl smiled with cracked teeth. The voice in the water. Suddenly, the pit screamed. A gust of wind exploded from its mouth, knocking Joanna back. She landed hard. The children stood in unison. Their song turned violent, dissonant. Blood trickled from their mouths. The pit had awakened. From within the darkness, something began to rise. It wasn't a creature. It was a presence, a shape that didn't move, but shifted. Reality around it. The candles went out. The stone cracked, and Joanna's ears filled with whispers. "She belongs to us. Finish the hymn. Seal the pact." Then she saw it, emerging from the pit, a man in black robes. Only, his face was missing, just a blank stretch of skin. He floated above the ground, hands outstretched, and in his palms beating hearts, children's hearts, still alive, still bleeding. Joanna screamed and backed away, but there was nowhere to run. The robed figure descended, hovering just above the pit. "You were spared," he said without lips. His voice echoed inside her skull. "Your brother took your place, but a soul unpaid leaves a debt." "No," Joanna said. "I didn't ask for this. I was a child. All pacts bind, even forgotten ones." She looked around. The children were staring at her, some pleading, some grinning. All trapped, and she saw it then. This wasn't about punishment. It was about feeding. The church had become a mouth, and the pit, its stomach. Joanna gripped the rosary tight and held it out. "You can't take me," she shouted. "I carry the mark of the priest." The figure paused. The hearts in his hands stopped beating. The children froze. Then laughter, mocking, hollow. He was the first to offer blood. Joanna's face paled. Father Matthias had started this. He'd baptized them one by one, said it was salvation, said it would bring him power, but he lied. He drowned them, child after child, until the pit answered. Joanna's stomach twisted. That meant Danny hadn't been the first. He'd been the last. The final offering, and she was meant to be the fifth, but she had escaped. Suddenly, the pit flared with fire. The robed figure began to scream, his skin melting, revealing bones carved with scripture. Joanna looked down. The rosary was burning her hand now, glowing. White-hot. She threw it into the pit. A boom echoed. Light exploded from below. The children screamed. The robed man disintegrated into ash. And the choir fell silent. Joanna blinked. The chamber was gone. She stood back in the main church hall, on her knees, gasping for air. Daylight was pouring in through shattered stained glass windows. It was over, wasn't it? She looked at her palm. A deep scar, in the shape of a rosary cross, had been burned into her flesh. A mark. She stood shakily, then heard it a splash. Coming from the baptism room. She turned, and there, standing just beyond the doorway, was Danny, soaking wet. Smiling. He said nothing, just pointed to the crypt door, now wide open. Joanna followed his gaze and realized, not all debts were paid, not yet. The covenant blood. Joanna stared into the darkness beyond the open crypt door. The pit was gone, the singing gone, but Danny was still standing there, wet, silent, and wrong. He smiled, but his eyes never blinked. His lips moved, but there was no breath, no sound, just a gesture. He pointed again, urging her toward the stairs. Joanna hesitated, the scar on her palm burned by the rosary. Robbed. Everything in her screamed, don't go back down. But some invisible rope tugged her forward. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. Danny turned, vanishing into the darkness. She followed. The crypt smelled like blood now, not just the iron scent, but old, clotted, spoiled blood, like it had soaked into the stones for centuries and was rising now, steaming with purpose. As she descended, the walls began to pulse, like veins. She reached the bottom again, and found the coffins were open now. Every single one. Empty. Except hers, still waiting. Joanna stepped forward slowly, her reflection shining faintly on the black polished wood of the coffin lid. And then she saw it. Something had changed. New letters had been scratched beneath her name. The blood must seal. From behind her, the priest, Father Matthias, appeared, but not as she'd last seen him. This time he was younger, healthy, his eyes sharp, his collar crisp. He held a silver bowl filled with water, and something else. Blood. Hers. She stepped back. You lied, she said. Father Matthias smiled faintly. No, I showed you only the part you were ready to see. You started the ritual. You drowned those kids. He didn't deny it. There are many kinds of sacrifice, he said, but few as pure as the soul of a child who still believes. Joanna clenched her fists. Why me? Because you were never meant to live, he said gently. Danny took your place, but death doesn't forget its portion. He dipped his fingers into the bowl and flicked the blood water toward the coffin. It sizzled on contact. Steam hissed upward. The lid slid open on its own. I won't get in, Joanna whispered. It's not about getting in, Father Matthias replied. It's about giving up. Joanna's hand burned again. The scar glowed like an ember. She turned to run, but the crypt warped. The exit stretched away, miles down a black tunnel, and from the tunnel, the children's voices returned, singing, weeping, begging. Finish it, free us. Joanna turned back to Father Matthias. He stood behind the altar now, arms raised. Blood from the bowl began to float in the air, spinning into shapes, symbols. Latin words formed mid-air, glowing red. Sanguine pactum, animi lib. Blood binds, souls are freed. A blade appeared in his hand, ancient, twisted, bone-handled. He walked toward her slowly. You must die, Joanna, but not in vain. You'll be the last. And the others, they'll be released. Joanna's lips trembled. You mean I'll set them free? If your blood is pure, he whispered. If your guilt is true. She shook her head violently. No, this isn't the only way. It is, he said. This place, this church, was built on ritual death. Every stone soaked in prayer and blood. He stepped forward. You carry both. You're the final key. Joanna's breath caught. Something changed in her then. Realization, a rage. She grabbed a broken cross from the nearest wall, with splintered edges sharp, and hurled it at the priest. It struck him in the chest. He staggered back, gasping. Blood soaked his robes, but it was black, not red. He wasn't alive, not anymore. Joanna ran. This time she didn't run toward the stairs. She ran deeper, deeper into the church's belly, past crypts, past graves, into a chamber untouched by light, a stone room with walls covered in names, scratched in childlike handwriting. Every child he ever drowned. Danny, Mara, Elias, Carmen, Livia, and at the center of the room, a small font, cracked bone white, filled not with water, but ashes. Joanna knelt beside it. Among the ashes, a locket. Her mother's. She opened it. Inside, a photo of Danny, and a baby version of her. On the back, twins, one soul. She gasped. That was the truth. Not a pact. Not just a sacrifice. She and Danny had been two halves of the same soul. One was always meant to live, one to die. It wasn't about guilt, it was about balance, and Father Matthias had tried to cheat it too, bind her life, and Danny's death, as a ritual. To hold power. She clenched the locket, and for the first time she understood what she had to do. She returned to the main crypt, not running, not afraid. Father Matthias was waiting at the altar, the knife still in hand. You returned to accept your fate? He asked. Joanna shook her head. No, I returned to end yours. She opened the locket and held it toward him. Twins, one soul. You never had the right to split us. His smile vanished. The children's coffins began to rattle. The walls shook. He lunged at her, knife raised, but Joanna caught his wrist and shoved the locket into his chest. It sizzled. He screamed. The ceiling cracked. Light poured in the altar, exploded in flame. The coffins burst open, and one by one, the spirits of the children rose, glowing, bright, radiant. Danny stood beside Joanna now, hand in hers. I'm ready, he whispered. She looked into his eyes. I'm sorry. He smiled. He didn't kill me, he did. Together, they stepped into the center of the chamber. The children surrounded them. All hands reached out, all eyes open, and with one final flash of blinding gold, the church collapsed. Locals later said they heard a sound like 1,000 voices, singing at once, just before the earth swallowed the last stone. Nothing was ever found beneath the rubble. No bodies. No bones. No altar. Only a broken silver rosary and a scorched photo of two smiling children in white baptism gowns. The doors never stay locked. The church was gone. Joanna stood on the edge of its ruins, dust still curling into the sky like smoke. Her clothes were torn, her body trembling, her hand still aching from the scar. But her heart, it was quiet. Danny's soul had been freed, the children had risen, and Father Matthias, the monster who turned holy walls into slaughterhouses, was gone forever. So why did the wind still whisper her name? 2 weeks passed. Joanna tried to return to a normal life, if there was such a thing, after surviving a church that fed on children. The local news had no explanation for the collapse. They called it a sinkhole, though no sinkhole leaves, melted wood and scorched stone behind. Joanna stayed silent. Who would believe her? She moved into her mother's old cottage in the hills, far from towns, far from graveyards. Far from churches, that nightmares came anyway, in them. She stood in the crypt again, only now it was filled with water. Black, still water. Floating above it, always, was Danny, arms outstretched, mouth open in a silent scream. Every night, she would reach for him. Every night, he would sink. One morning, she awoke with dirt under her fingernails. Another morning, she awoke to find the tub in her bathroom filled with muddy water, even though she hadn't turned the faucet in days. The water stank of ashes and roses. She dumped it out. She didn't sleep that night. Joanna sought help. A local priest, younger and kinder, agreed to bless the cottage after she begged. He walked the rooms, sprinkled holy water, whispered Latin. He stopped when he reached the old cabinet in the corner of the living room, one that had been in the family for generations. He frowned. Did you paint this recently? No, she replied. Why? He traced a finger along the wood. Under the dust, under the polish, a symbol, carved in with a knife, a circle, a cross, a flame. Joanna's stomach dropped. That was the same symbol Father Matthias had drawn in blood. The priest stepped back. His fingers trembled. This is old, dangerous. This is binding work. Ritual sealants. He turned to her. This house is marked. That church, whatever it was, followed you here. Joanna staggered. No, I destroyed it. I finished it. The priest looked at her, gently. Some pacts don't end, they just change shape. That night, she lit every candle she owned, every light, but the house felt darker anyway. The shadows didn't stretch. They watched. And sometime past 3 a.m., she heard it again, from under the floorboards. Dripping. She pried up the floor the next morning. Underneath, a cavity, and inside it, a book, wrapped in what looked like old choir robes. She pulled it out, slowly, heart racing. The robes were stained. Inside the book, dozens of pages, handwritten, bloodstained, Father Matthias's journal. The first page was dated 1965, but the last, 2025. Her hands shook how he was dead. She had watched him burn, but there it was, written in the same curling ink. The last child was freed, but the door was never truly sealed. The soul was split. One lived, one died. The living one carries the wound. She is the key. She is the lock. And locks, as we know, eventually open. She turned the page. It was blank then, right in front of her eyes. Words began to appear like ink soaking through from nowhere. You finished the ritual, but not the bloodline. Your family was never innocent. Your mother baptized you in his name before the church claimed you. Joanna dropped the book. It thudded shut. Suddenly, the candles flickered out. The temperature plummeted, and from the corner of the room, a voice, childlike, familiar. Joe. She turned. Danny. But not as he had appeared before. Now he was older, about 12. Wet, pale, but his eyes were full of sorrow. You freed me, he whispered, but the house still remembers. The pact was bigger than you or me. Joanna staggered back. I buried it. I destroyed the church. Danny looked down. You ended his part. But there were others. He raised a hand, pointed at the ceiling. At the attic. You need to see. Joanna climbed the stairs like she was walking into her own funeral. The attic door opened before she touched it. Dust poured down. Inside, old trunks, moth-eaten clothes, a cracked mirror. And in the corner, another coffin. Small, child-size. On the lid, a cross, burned in. Her breath caught. No, she whispered. It creaked open on its own, empty, and then her reflection appeared in the mirror. Only it wasn't her. It was her mother. Younger, crying, holding a baby. Joanna watched, frozen, as her mother placed the baby into the coffin, then whispered, "Take her soul, spare the boy." The mirror shattered. Joanna fell to her knees. She understood now. Her mother had made the first deal, offered her not Danny, but the church had taken Danny instead, because Joanna had resisted, and now the debt had doubled. She stumbled downstairs, back to the journal. It was open again. New words had appeared. 2 were promised. Only 1 was taken. The pact is broken, unless it is rewritten. Suddenly, the house groaned. The windows cracked. Water poured down the stairs, like a flood. Danny's voice screamed from the walls. Joanna, you have to finish it. She stood, shaking, soaked, but ready. I won't kill. I won't sacrifice. I won't be like them. She turned to the altar she'd built on her kitchen table. The rosary, the broken cross, the journal. She took the scarred rosary and sliced her own, palm open again. Blood dripped onto the pages, and she whispered, "This blood is mine. This choice is mine. No priest, no pact, no church. Let this blood end it." For a long moment, silence. Then the book ignited. White flame. A scream echoed through the walls. Hundreds of voices, wailing in unison. The wind stopped. The lights returned, and the water vanished. Outside, dawn broke. For the first time in weeks, Joanna felt warmth on her face. She stepped into the yard. No ghosts, no singing, no Danny. Just quiet. She walked to the tree where she and Danny used to play as kids, and beneath it, someone had carved new words in the bark. Some doors never stay locked, but some locks learn to fight back. She smiled through her tears, and, for the first time, she closed the door to the past, the end.